3 months ago I added these covers to the raised bed in my front garden food growing space. I based the design in trying to make mini polytunnels that would go over the raised beds and boost productivity. It was a really fun project to do. But the reason you've clicked this video is you want to know whether or not it was worth it, whether or not I would recommend that you do it. And in this video I'm going to be really brutally honest about the realities of the results that you get by going to all the effort of building a raised bed cover like this. There's quite a bit that you have to think about. In this video I'm going to talk about why I built these raised bed covers, how I did so, and more importantly how you can do so. But I'm going to be very honest about whether or not I would recommend that you go to all the trouble of building raised bed covers. Do they give you results? Well, firstly, it was a really straightforward project to do. You can see here that I'm just building a timber frame that goes on the top of the raised bed, and you would cut the wood to whatever size of raised bed that you've got. You just make sure that it overlaps so it's resting on the top of the raised bed. I then added these pipes that form the arches that are going to hold up the cover. I just used 15mm pipe and screwed it onto the timber rails that go around the raised bed, sometimes with more success than others. I managed to salvage this piping from a nearby skip, so it didn't cost me anything, but this thickness worked really well for me. It supported polythene, as you'll see in a minute. It's really worth taking your time and, most importantly, making sure that these hoops are level with each other at their apex. You want them to be mirror images of each other, if that makes sense, because you want the polythene to be really tight. You want the cover to fit nicely, because when it presses down on these arches nice and snug, you're going to get tension, and the tension of the cover will actually determine how strong it is, how resilient it is to wind, and it will look much smarter as well. You can see here we're taking our time making sure that the lengths of pipe are exactly the same length and that they're secured to the frame at exactly the same height too. That should give you that uniform structure and therefore tension on the overall project. Then we get to do the good bit, to actually cover the raised bed, and at this point it actually starts to take shape, doesn't it? You can see, I know I'm labouring this point, but it's really important that the hoops are all roughly the same height and you've got a uniform tension across the cover. I would strongly recommend, if possible, you have a friend with you for covering a polytunnel or indeed a small raised bed like this, because the slightest gust of wind makes your job a lot harder. You want to try and get as much tension as you can at this point in the process. I'm using the same techniques that I use to cover a polytunnel in covering this raised bed. So you can see here I'm adding some old roofing batten offcuts onto the sides of the raised beds. I'm just going to nail those into place just to form a tight tension to hold the cover in place. And for this first one, so long as you get the tension fairly decent on the side that you can see nearest to the camera, the rest of it will be okay. We'll pull down really tight on the other side. Just secure this batten using some nails. Try to get a really good connection, a really good tension between the batten and the cover, and that will make it really strong, really secure. We then repeated this process, adding another batten to the other side of the cover. And you can see here that Kate is just pushing down and applying a little bit of tension to the cover as I'm banging in nails and trapping the cover in the batten on the other side. It's really important to add another timber support at either end of the cover, just to stop the arches at either end from bowing in on themselves. It's much easier to do this before you add the cover. I'd forgotten to do it. What about the results? Well, this cover allowed me to plant under the raised bed throughout the coldest months of the year. You can see here I've been able to add a selection of crops, hardy crops, to harvest throughout the coldest months of the year. And in terms of the experiment that I've been doing in my front garden, in terms of how much money I can save, this has been an absolute game changer. I need to make something very clear. A cover like this doesn't offer a huge amount of insulation. If a crop is not hardy, this cover may not protect it fully. However, for these hardy winter crops that you can see on the screen right now, the mustards, lettuces, mizuna, the cover provides a really perfect environment for them to grow and be more productive during the coldest months of the year. It's important to be clear, a cover like this in no way replicates the benefits of a heated greenhouse or an unheated greenhouse for that matter. What it does is, in my opinion, in my experience, it added productive weeks to the growing season. The results that you're going to get growing in a raised bed like this with a cover are going to differ radically depending on what you're growing. But for me, this cover meant that the arrival of winter came about 4 weeks later. The arrival of spring has arrived a few weeks earlier. It's the same phenomenon that I see growing commercially in a poly. Even on a chilly day in winter, when the sun hits these covers, it warms the bed underneath it. It seems to just hold in those perfect growing conditions and promote that bit of extra growth. It protects your plants from the worst that the winter can throw at them. And for that reason, these raised bed covers have been a great success for me.